Hi, this is Scott Wilkinson, host of Home Theater Geeks. In episode 166, I chat with Don Shaw of Christie about the state of commercial digital projection. So stay tuned.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Home Theater Geeks is provided by CashFly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Home Theater Geeks with Scott Wilkinson, recorded July 15th, 2013. Episode 166, The Future of Projectors. This episode of Home Theater Geeks is brought to you by Ting.com. Ting is a mobile phone service that makes sense. Save money with Ting. Pay for what you use. Doesn't require a contract and offers unlimited devices on one pooled plan. To save $25 on your first Ting device, visit htg.ting.com. That's htg.ting.com. And by ProXPN. ProXPN is a virtual private network that allows you to use the internet the way it should be, anonymous and unfiltered. For 20% off your new account, go to proxpn.com/twit and use the code HTG. Hey there, Scott Wilkinson here, the Home Theater Geek and Director of Content at avsforum.com. This week's guest geek is Don Shaw, the Senior Director of Product Development at Christie, maker of digital cinema projectors. Hey, Don, welcome to the show.
Hi, Scott. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Now, for those who are watching live at live.twit.tv or logged into the chat room at irc.twit.tv, can post questions for Don as we go, and I'll pass along as many as I can. So, Don, you're involved in digital cinema, and there's a lot of stuff going on in that space, as they say today. What is the penetration of digital projection in commercial cinemas now? I know it's pretty far along. Are there any film projection theaters left?
Well, as you said, it is an exciting place to be right now. As you may know, Christie's is right at the forefront as part of the digital cinema conversion. Right now, there's about 125,000, 130,000 movie screens in the world, and I would say that we've surpassed over 100,000 of them are now digital, with Christie having about 40,000 of those screens. Wow!
So it's well over halfway.
Oh yeah!
Totally.
In terms of the remainder are still film projectors, but the exhibitors are facing an issue, is that there's a looming end to film. And, you know, some regions are already 100% digital, and there's simply no film available in those regions right now. And that's coming soon for all of the markets around the world. I would say by the end of 2015, every movie theater will be digital.
Wow. Now, I do know that the studios have been quite interested in stopping having to deliver film because, you know, after all, you have to deliver these physical big reels of film. They have to process them, and all of that is very expensive. Plus the fact that film degrades over time as you play it again and again and again. The 100th viewing is not nearly as good as the first. Sure,
I mean, those are great points. There's a huge incentive for the Hollywood community to encourage the switch to digital. And one of the big things is a reel of film costs anywhere from $1,000 to $1,500 to get out to an exhibitor. Whereas, of course, with a digital copy, you send a hard drive or you send a digital file, you beam it out via satellite, in some cases internet. But also, as you said, a digital version, it's going to be as good on the 100th showing, the 200th showing, as it was the day that they struck the films.
Right, exactly. Now, am I correct that the majority of delivery now is by hard disk, that they actually physically ship a hard disk to the exhibitor? Or how much of the delivery is being done by satellite or other sort of quote-unquote online means?
As far as I know, it is mostly hard drive shipments right now. That seems to be the best way to get the files around. They're somewhere around 300 gigabytes in size, so transferring them on the internet is still a little bit, they're still a little bit large for that. There are some regions of the world where they have a very a very well-established satellite infrastructure. Some of the places like India, there's some, believe it or not, countries in South America that are putting in some good satellite infrastructure, and there's some areas of the U.S. as well that use satellite, but it's still, the majority is still hard drive delivery.
You mentioned India, and I wanted to ask you about Bollywood, which is a very prolific, industry there in India. They put out tons of movies. Sure. Are they also making the switch to digital as quickly as everywhere else?
In India, they even have more of an incentive because there's such an appetite for movie content. And, India is the second largest country in the world in terms of film appetite. And they also have a very diverse geography. So it's difficult to get enough copies of the film and get them out to the remote regions. So they've, in fact, led the conversion to digital, but they've chosen to adopt, initially they chose to adopt something called e-cinema, which is slightly different from the D-cinema standard that all of the Hollywood studios impose on exhibitors playing their first-run content. In India, the e-cinema standard, it's a little bit less stringent on the quality side of things, but now they've found, and it's happening more and more, they're converting from e-cinema over to D-cinema as well, which is going to give the audiences there the same quality experience that you can get anywhere else in the world.
So what is e-cinema? How does it distinguish from D-cinema?
It's just a lot less stringent on the standards. They use 1080p projection systems. They use 720p. There isn't a really strict, okay, it's got to be 2K by 1K or 4K by 2K, and it's got to follow this color space. It's just here's your digital projector. They use MPEG-2 encryption versus JPEG 2000. But they really are starting to switch over to the D-cinema standards so that the Hollywood community lets them play first-run Hollywood films.
Mm-hmm. Analog Kid in the chat room is saying the future of film will continue in small art theaters. What do you think about that?
It's possible, but it's going to be driven by economies of scale. And at some point, it's going to cost so much to strike a film print. I'm not sure that these small art theaters are going to be able to source them and make the copies that they need.
Right.
You might have better luck with archival type content where the film already exists, and if you've got a film projector capable of playing it.
Yeah, I guess some theaters are going to keep old film projectors around for a while during the transition because, well, there might be older copies of films, as you say, that might not have been archived or whatever.
Yeah, I think that'll be an exception, but certainly we've seen projection rooms where they've got a film projector and digital projector right beside it. So.
Right, exactly. What about one of the big issues in digital cinema, and is becoming more of an issue in home theater, is 2K versus 4K. Now, just to define that for everybody, those terms mean slightly different things in commercial cinemas as opposed to the home. But we're talking about commercial cinema on this show, so I will define 2K as 2,048 pixels across, left to right, by 1080, 1,080 pixels up and down, as opposed to 4K, which is 4,096 pixels across by 2,160 pixels up and down. Now, a lot of movies are being either shot with digital cameras at 4K resolution, or they're being shot on film and then digitized to 4K resolution. And yet, most theaters, when you go out to the theater and go to a digital cinema, the projector is only 2K resolution. So I'd like for you to discuss how that is working now, and is there a transition in the works for commercial cinemas to have 4K projectors? And if so, are they actually showing native 4K content? My impression has been that they're not. They're still only showing 2K content that has been up-converted.
Sure. There's very little 4K native Hollywood content. I mean, there's filmmakers who are shooting in 4K, and then often they end up using that to give them more pan and scan area, more detailed, more stuff to clip. I would say 95% of Hollywood content is released as a 2K master or a 2K DCP, which stands for digital cinema package. So they package it all up, they encode it and encrypt it as a 2K digital cinema package. Now there's some exceptions, and I believe you can go to Sony's website and find a list of all the 4K movies ever made, and you'll see that the list was probably bigger 3 or 4 years ago, and it's dwindled a little bit. Like I said, in most cases, it's delivered as 2K. In terms of install base, about 80% of digital cinema projectors around the world are 2K. And, you know, in 95% of those cases, that's probably the right choice for the theater. I mean, at some point, you don't get the benefits of the increased resolution going from 2K to 4K, especially in the pro cinema world, where you tend to be sitting a little farther back from the screen. And albeit it's a large screen, but in a professional cinema, the screens are also perforated because the speakers are behind the screen. So at some point, your resolution gets so high. If you were close enough to see that resolution, you would see the screen perforations before you would be resolution limited. So, you know, in most cases, with the exception of theaters with really large screens, 2K is more than adequate for the optimal cinema experience.
Which is, it surprises me a little bit. I mean, I go to the digital cinema all the time, and I see stuff projected in 2K, and I don't see pixels. But then again, I sit, you know, at least half or 2/3 of the way back.
Like most people do, yeah. You know, no one wants to be in that front row because you're moving your head around, and sometimes that's not ideal. I think the ideal spot to sit in a theater is 1/3 to 2/3 of the way back, and that's ideal for the video quality and the audio quality.
But Christie does make a 4K projector now, do they not?
Absolutely, and for your very large screens and your premier theaters, your premium theaters, 4K is the only way to go. Absolutely.
You mentioned that 2K is what's delivered to most cinemas, but I was told by, I think it was Chris Cookson at Sony, that actually the DCP, the digital cinema package, the file that gets delivered, is very often, it includes the 4K information as well as a 2K version or some metadata that instructs the projector how to display it as 2K, or if it's only a 2K projector. Is he correct?
I think that's a slight exaggeration. The digital cinema package is capable of carrying 4K and instructions for displaying it in 2K, but it's very rare. I mean, it's probably less than 5% of the cases that the actual DCP is packaged up as 4K.
He was saying that that's mostly because post-production houses, for the most part, are not set up to deal with 4K throughout the workflow process.
I think that's by and large true, but more and more the post houses are installing 4K capable technology. But you know, really, Sony really has. You said he was from Sony Digital Cinema. They only sell 4K projectors, and they're really the only studio that's put any effort into 4K content. So I think getting his perspective on that.
Yeah, true enough.
May not be the broad perspective of the industry.
Right, exactly. You mentioned that DCPs are typically, what, 300 gigabytes, you said?
Yeah, somewhere in that range. It depends on the resolution. It depends on the frame rate. It depends on the length of the film as well. But there's a standard encoding, maximum bitrate encoding somewhere. I think it's 250 megabits per second to fit within the DCI specification.
And most projectors can handle that kind of bit rate.
Absolutely, and with newer integrated media block technology, there's projectors that can handle up to 400 and 500 megabits per second. You know, with The Hobbit that played last December, I believe that was delivered to the high frame rate theaters at 450 megabits per second.
Well, that leads me to ask you my next question about high frame rate.
Sure.
We saw The Hobbit came out at 48 frames per second, and that was 48 frames per second per eye in 3D. That was the only way you could see the high frame rate, was in a 3D presentation.
Yep, that's correct.
And it had mixed reviews. Did you see it in high frame rate?
I did indeed, and we worked a lot with Park Road Post in helping them get their equipment and their pipeline in place, especially at the back end where they needed a high frame rate capable projector for their dailies and their viewing, and to make sure that the DCPs were packaged up right. We supported them for their premiere. Personally, I loved the look of high frame rates. I thought it made the panoramic scenes look much more detailed and much smoother as you panned across the beautiful New Zealand landscapes. I thought it brought the characters to life more in 3D, made it much more immersive, made you feel like you were part of the experience. And, I think there's just as many people who didn't like it, though. The purists who said it doesn't look like film. Well, it doesn't. It looks better. And I think one would argue that back in the 50s or the 40s, there was people who didn't like color in film. And if you want to go back even farther to the early 1900s, there was people that didn't like audio in their films. Those talkies, they were things, those talkies. So it is the next technology evolution, and I commend Peter Jackson and Warner Brothers for taking that risk. And I think it's truly visionary, and it is the future of cinema. So
you think we'll see more movies? I know that James Cameron is working. I'm pretty sure Avatar 2 will be at a higher frame rate. Yeah. Do you expect to see more movies come out?
Well, certainly the next Hobbit installment, the next two, which have already been shot, will be at high frame rates. James Cameron has said he's going to be shooting Avatar 2 and 3 at high frame rates. He might even push the envelope and go up to 60 frames per second per eye, which would be great to see. I think it's just going to take the Hollywood community some time. It's going to take a few of these films from the leading filmmakers to start convincing people this is the way to go. And the future is definitely in high frame rates. Now, there's also another way to look at it is, just because you have high frame rate capability or you want to shoot a movie in high frame rates doesn't mean that every scene has to be high frame rates. So you can have some action scenes that you're trying to avoid motion blur. You can have some other scenes where you're trying to avoid judder. Shoot those in high frame rates. Shoot the other scenes where you're trying to achieve a more filmic look. You can shoot those at 24 as well, and do a frame doubling or something to keep the projector up. So
Wouldn't that look weird, though, as you're watching the movie? Some scenes in high frame rate, some scenes in 24p, 24 frames per second. Wouldn't that look a little weird, disjointed, perhaps?
I don't know. I've never seen it, but certainly there's another filmmaker, famous filmmaker and special effects supervisor, Douglas Trumbull, who's advocating that approach right now, and he's putting together some test content that we're working with him on. And he's pretty adamant that having the ability to vary the frame rates from one scene to another, not necessarily within a scene, but from one scene to another, will be a powerful effect for giving a movie the look and the feel that directors want.
Well, he certainly knows what he's talking about there, because he's been experimenting with high frame rates for a very long time. So I can't wait to see what he comes up with. And if you're working with him, if Christie is working with him on this, can't wait to see that demo material. I have to tell you, at NAB, not this year, but last year, I saw in the Christie booth some of the test footage that James Cameron shot for demonstrating high frame rate, and it was remarkable. And I would love to see that kind of material available for more people to see, to get a sense of what's possible.
Yeah, I mean, it is a little bit difficult to roll out a demo like that. You do need specialized cinema equipment and projectors and media blocks that are capable of decoding it at those bit rates. But certainly we tried our best to get that demo out to as many people in the Hollywood and the filmmaking community as we could, as well as among the exhibitor community. Certainly, I can let you know if we're planning to do another high frame rate demo using the camera. Yeah.
Please do. I would definitely want to check that out. Well, listen, before we continue, I would like to take a moment to thank one of our sponsors for this episode, which is Ting, new sponsor for Home Theater Geeks. Ting is a no BS mobile service. It's basically a reseller for the nationwide Sprint network. There are no contracts or early termination fees or anything like that. No bundling or ride-along services, no overage charges or penalties. If you use more than you thought you would, just pay for what you need. No add-on charges, no mysterious line items on your bill. Unlimited devices on one plan. You can have as many devices as you want, and it's very simple. Powerful online account control panel that lets you take account of your control of your account, your usage, and your bills. And no holds barred customer support even. All you have to do is call 1-855-TING-FTW anytime between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. Eastern Time, and a real person will pick up the phone. Holy smokes. And there's great online support as well. How does it work? First, you purchase your mobile device from Ting, which you'll receive in 2 to 5 business days. Then you activate your device and have the option to select a new phone number or port an existing one. Ting will break out your rates by minutes, text messages, and megabytes, and bill you at the end of the month for exactly what you used. Visit Ting today at htg.ting.com and save money and better manage your mobile phone usage with Ting. Check out their savings calculator and see how much you or your company can save. Home Theater Geeks viewers also save $25 on your first Ting device when you sign up. So visit htg.ting.com and start saving today. And we thank Ting very much for their support of Home Theater Geeks. Okay, one of the folks in the chat room has asked a question that is my next question anyway, so he anticipated me very well, which is laser illumination. Now, Christie, I happen to live in Burbank, California, and there was a demonstration of a Christie laser illuminated projector at the AMC theater here for a couple weeks, showing G.I. Joe, the latest G.I. Joe movie, which is not a movie I would have normally gone to see, but I was fascinated to go and see a commercial demonstration of laser illumination. So tell us about what that was, what a laser illumination is, as opposed to the conventional way of throwing light onto a screen. How did that test work out, and what can we expect in the future?
So laser projection is absolutely the future of cinema. It's going to be the next great evolution in terms of how a cinema projector operates. And what we did for that is we take the lamp house out of the projector. So you take all the heat, the huge source of heat, and actually the biggest source of maintenance out of a projector. And in Christie's case, we have a rack of laser devices sitting beside the projectors, and we fiber couple the lasers right into the integrator rod of the projector. So the benefits of a laser projector are several-fold. I mean, the first one is the obvious. There's operational benefits for an exhibitor. They don't have to inventory lamps and change xenon lamps. There's environmental
which are very expensive, by the way, xenon lamps.
Sure. I mean, for a 6 kilowatt lamp, you might get 700 hours use out of it, and it can cost upwards of $1,500, $2,000. And you know, if there's exhibitors changing 4 or 5 of these a year, you can see the operational costs of the lamp alone, plus training people to change them. And like I said, there's an environmental impact of throwing away xenon charged lamps. There's also safety issues in changing them. And you know, laser projection with a projected 10-year lifespan eliminates that operational hassle. But you know, I think more importantly for me as a video geek, or someone who really appreciates what I see on the screen, is laser projection gives us the opportunity for much more brightness on the screen. So the projector that we had in Burbank at the AMC theater was over 70,000 lumens. And what that allowed us to do was put 14 foot Lamberts of light onto a 60-plus foot screen, which is unprecedented in commercial cinema. Often you'll see...
Now that's 14 foot Lamberts in 3D.
In 3D. That's measured through the 3D glasses. So often in cinemas, it wouldn't be difficult to find a cinema that's operating at 2 or 3 foot Lamberts in 3D, where the DCI specification for 2D is, and always has been since its inception, it's been at 14 foot Lamberts. Why they've come along and allowed 3D to be shown at 2, 3, 4-foot Lamberts, it's beyond me. I think it's probably a commercial decision. But when you see a film, and Scott, I'm sure you can attest to this, when you see a 3D film at 14-foot Lamberts, it's really great experience.
It really is. It's why I generally, when I see a 3D movie, my first choice is generally IMAX, primarily because they use 2 projectors, which doubles the amount of light that's coming off the screen and provides a brighter picture.
Sure. In the case of IMAX, they do use 2 projectors. They're nowhere near 14-foot Lamberts, so they by no means have the most efficient 3D system. So in fact, the 3D system they use actually throws away a lot of the light, even more so than the most popular 3D system in use in the U.S.
Really? Why is that?
It's just a choice they made, is to go with a linear-based polarization system, and it's just not as efficient as some of the other ones. But they make up for that by having a second projector in place there. So double the projection power does mean double the light output.
Right, exactly. And I'm a little surprised actually that lasers can get that hot, if you will, that bright. I guess you said you have a separate laser package, some box separated from the projector that's linked to the projector with fiber optics, right?
Yeah. So one of the great things about our approach is it's totally modular. We're going to have a laser module that's somewhere between 5 and 10,000 lumens, and you buy as many as you need for the screen size and for the brightness that you're trying to achieve. Stack them all together in a rack away from the projector, and they're fiber optically coupled. You could probably go 10, 15, 20 meters. The energy loss across the fiber is minimal. It might change the way that projection or that movie theaters are designed. Right now you have a big projection booth behind the audience to house the projector and to keep the sounds and the operational things away from the audience. But in the future, with laser projection, with a remote projection head, you can put that right in the theater with the audience. It's not going to make any noise. It's not going to put out any heat. You can have all the heat and the noise and the fans in a remote location, fiber coupled to the projector. So that's a huge opportunity for re-architecting the way a cinema looks in the future.
It could mean, for example, that you wouldn't need glass between the projector and the theater, which is there at least in part to isolate the projector's noise.
That's absolutely why it's there. Yeah.
So without it, you would then get greater efficiency, more light onto the screen, which would benefit the viewer experience tremendously.
Sure, and even more importantly, for a typical multiplex that exists in a mall where lease rates and property values are extremely high, this gives the exhibitor an opportunity to use their space better. You might be able to put in 3 or 4 more extra rows of seats because you don't have to deal with a huge projection booth behind them.
Now, does the laser module generate as much heat as a 6 kilowatt xenon lamp?
Yeah, there's some myths going around about laser projection, and one of the big myths that I'd like to dispel here today is that laser projection is going to save wall plug power, and that's simply not true. The laser projectors themselves, the light source itself uses much less energy than a xenon lamp, but one of the problems with lasers, or one of the challenges with lasers, is that you have to cool them to a subambient temperature, and the act of cooling something subambient in itself takes a huge amount of energy. So what we're finding is the best case scenario, it's probably going to be a push, as in the laser projector at a similar lumen output is going to use about the same total power if you factor in cooling and illumination as would a traditional xenon projector. But I would expect that anyone who's buying a laser projector is going to want more juice. They're going to want to put more light on the screen, so you're going to end up having to use more wall plug power with the laser projector than you did with your xenon projector.
What was the result of the Burbank test? Did you solicit feedback from viewers? Did you have people from Christie and from the studios go in there and check it out? What were their responses?
Absolutely. We had a lot of invited guests go through in private showings, a lot of the Hollywood filmmakers and the studio execs, and we thought we went one step farther by inviting the general public to show up and buy a ticket, and I think you were able to take advantage of that, Scott.
I did, in fact.
I thank you for that. The feedback was overwhelmingly positive. Some people who are familiar with the art of laser projection went in and they were looking for speckle, and some people saw speckle on the screen. But I would think that the average film goer, the average movie goer, had no idea that they were even watching a laser projector, other than, yeah, this is really bright. This is great. The contrast is better than a typical cinema experience, and really, I'm finally seeing 3D the way 3D should be seen.
Mm-hmm. Define speckle and tell us a little bit about that.
Speckle happens when when the coherent light from the laser sources hits the screen and it breaks up. And the best experiment you could probably do at home is to take a laser pointer and point it at a white wall, and you'll see a bright spot. But then if you look around the bright spot from the laser pointer, you'll see a bunch of little dots. And that same effect manifests itself onto a cinema screen when you're using lasers as the light source. It sort of looks like a video noise, but it's a little bit different because it looks like noise that sits still until you move your head around a little bit, and then the little dots move around. Now that's one of the biggest technical challenges right now that projector manufacturers are dealing with for laser projection, and we've got all sorts of countermeasures in place to reduce speckle. At the AMC Burbank, we were actually vibrating the screen. We had some little vibrators. They work at about the frequency of the ringer vibrator on your cell phone. We had a few dozen of them strategically placed throughout the screen, and it was actually just a very low frequency vibration on the screen. I don't think it was detectable by the audience. Did you notice the screen was vibrating, Scott?
I didn't. I'm quite surprised at that, actually. You mean to say that you actually attached little vibrators, I would presume, to the back of the screen material itself?
That's absolutely correct. It sounds like a bit of a hack, but it's simple, it's effective, it's reliable, and it's cheap, and it's the way to go until we've perfected our other speckle countermeasures.
Wow. I did think I saw some speckling a little bit, but there wasn't very much.
Yeah, and what was one other thing that was working against us in that demo is it was a silver screen, and it was a brand new silver screen, and what we found in our labs is that silver screens tend to be the worst performing for speckle performance. Had it been a white screen or a matte screen, I don't believe anyone would have seen any speckle on that screen at all.
But of course, a white screen wouldn't preserve polarization, so the only way to get 3D would be to use Dolby 3D. As opposed to polarized 3D.
Or shuttered glasses, yeah.
Or shuttered glasses, which I never recommend. And in fact, it's interesting that the ArcLight cinemas, the whole chain, used to use active glasses from Expand, and they are now in the process of switching over to Dolby 3D.
Are they? Okay.
Yeah, because, I mean, I don't know. I haven't talked to the management of ArcLight cinemas, but my understanding certainly is, as I've gone to some ArcLight 3D presentations, I do know that active shutter glasses are much dimmer still, even than polarized glasses or Dolby 3D, and makes for a very unsatisfying experience, shall we say.
Shuttered glasses have their own artifacts, and to some people, myself included, they feel a little bit unnatural to have these active glasses shutting your eyes off, essentially. But every 3D system has its drawbacks. And
true enough. Yeah. There's some chatter in the chat room about this term we were using a little earlier called foot Lamberts.
Okay.
Can you explain a little bit about what foot Lamberts is and contrast that with lumens, which is the other common amount of light speck that we see?
Foot Lamberts is also, the metric version of foot Lamberts is something called nits. Candelas per square meter, and the relationship 14 foot Lamberts would be somewhere around 50 nits. But in terms of perception, it's the brightness that you perceive at one point on the screen. So a projector itself puts out, let's say a projector puts out 10,000 lumens. So it's going to be able to light up some screens at 14 foot Lamberts. So probably a 30-foot screen, for instance. But if the screen gets that much bigger, then the lumens coming out of the projector, which is constant, have to be spread out over a larger screen. So your point brightness, your perceived point brightness at any spot on that screen will be lower. So your foot Lamberts will be lower.
So essentially, lumens is a measure of the light coming out of the projector, and foot Lamberts is a measure of how much light you perceive being reflected off the screen at a given point.
Well, that's a better definition, yes.
I'm just trying to make sure that everybody understands the terminology here, because you know, this show is called Home Theater Geeks after all, and so we get pretty geeky. But sure. I don't want to leave people behind with technobabble for sure. My next question then relates to what we've been talking about, which is 3D. You know, 3D was a huge deal 2 years ago at CES, at least in terms of the home, and then last December at January rather at CES, we saw almost nothing about it, even though it was there and it was everywhere. In terms of the home, 3D has become, you know, just another feature that comes with your TV. You almost don't pay for it, and some people like it and some people don't. And a lot of people say, "Oh, 3D is dead in the home." I don't think that's necessarily true, but it's certainly not dead in the commercial cinema, is it?
3D is doing well in commercial cinema, especially in less mature markets. I think in North America we're starting to see that the novelty's wearing off a little bit, and in some cases where we, the industry, haven't presented it at the right brightness levels in many cases, the audience is not necessarily 100% satisfied with the experience. I think there's a lot of things we can do to improve it, and the first and foremost thing being brightness. So in mature cinema markets, North America, we're seeing attendance declining in 3D versus the 2D version of the same movie on opening week. In developing markets, in China, in Europe, it's pretty level right now, but in developing markets, they love 3D. They're paying all kinds of money. They're paying all kinds of upcharge to see 3D films, and it's just explosive growth. In the home, I can't really comment on what's going on in the home right now. Christie's we're not a player in home theater. I think certainly you and your viewers might have a better perspective on what's going on with 3D in the home than I do.
So Christie doesn't play at all in the home space. You don't make any projectors that are intended for big home theaters?
You know, in ultra high-end home theater, you might find some OEM projectors that if you peeled back enough layers of the skin, you'd find a Christie projector underneath, but we don't go direct to the home theater market at this time.
Isn't there a Sim 2 projector that's a Christie, that uses a Christie as its core?
I don't have anything to announce on that right now, Scott.
Okay. All right. I understand. Well, let's talk another question regarding laser projection. It certainly serves 3D because it puts more light on the screen, and therefore more light gets to your eyes through the 3D glasses. The other question regarding laser projection is color gamut. Now, color gamut is the range of colors that can be reproduced by a display system like a Christie projector or something like that. In the home, we have a particular gamut, which is called Rec. 709. In the digital cinema, we have a different gamut. I believe it's called P3, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. Yes.
Which is wider. You can display a wider range of colors.
It's wider, and that's one of the things that makes a digital cinema projector special versus what you'd be able to find in a home theater system is, you know, with a xenon lamp that you'd find in a professional cinema projector. It's got a much more balanced color spectrum output, and it lets you have a much higher color gamut. So I think, you know, we're probably running 45–50% more color gamut out of a DCI projector than you get with Rec. 709.
So how is the color gamut affected by laser projection? I mean, lasers, obviously, I assume you have a red, a green, and a blue laser, or multiples thereof, and they produce a single frequency, a single wavelength of red, green, and blue. And I presume they can be tuned. So how does that work? Do you tune your lasers to reproduce the P3 color gamut that's specified by the Digital Cinema Initiative, or can you actually go beyond that even?
So the lasers aren't tuned in real time by any means. They're designed from day one at the fab, at the semiconductor fab, as being a certain wavelength of light, so 543 nanometers or something like that. And you've got a very finely tuned red, a very finely tuned green, and a very finely tuned blue. And you can draw your color gamut triangles such that they far exceed any other display technology, even with just the 3 RGB primaries. It's quite remarkable the type of color output you can get from a laser projector. But I'm just anticipating your next question. To really enjoy that increased color gamut, you would need content that's been designed or mastered to take advantage of that content. And I think that's going to be quite a few years off in the Hollywood community.
Yeah. Certainly you would need cameras that can capture that wider gamut. And I don't know that much about cameras, particularly digital cameras these days, in terms of, are they designed to capture the same gamut that is being projected in a digital cinema, that is P3, this wider color gamut?
I believe the cameras are more than capable of capturing much more color than we were able to display on the screen. But I mean, after a scene is shot, it goes through all types of color processing and color timing to get it the way the director wants it to look, and to get it to match the DCI color space, so that it's faithfully reproduced on all of the digital cinema projectors. And that's why our projectors have to be built to such a strict standard, is really so we can produce a consistent experience across all the theaters in the world that are labeled as being DCI compliant cinemas.
So for the moment, you're having these lasers tuned at the factory as they're being built to reproduce that specific color gamut that's specified in the Digital Cinema Initiative, so that when the file gets to the cinema, gets to the final theater and gets projected, it has the range of colors that the content creator, the movie maker, had in mind.
So yeah, and we have to do a little bit of electronic color correction depending on how the lasers are configured in the projector to bring your white point back to the DCI white point. And you know, when you install a projector, there's certain calibration that has to be done. And again, I'm sure that you and your viewers are more than familiar with the process of calibrating a projector. It would be the same for a laser projector, and you just do a lot of the tuning via electronics. But suffice it to say that the wavelengths we've chosen are more than capable of covering the DCI color space and then some.
Nerve in the chat room is asking, wouldn't computers play a potential role in moving color to that wider space, which is out of DCI spec due to the source cameras not being able to do the capture? Just wondering what Christie's take is on this post-production potential. Do you guys get involved in post-production much?
We're not really big players in the filmmaking and post-production side, other than we supply projectors for most of the big Hollywood post houses. And you know, they're pretty demanding customers, and their main concern is that we supply projectors to them that are going to look like the projectors that exhibitors have in the movie theaters.
Right. They want to be able to see they want to be able to see the same thing that consumers are going to see once the movie gets into a commercial cinema.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, well, before we go on, I do want to thank our second sponsor for this episode of Home Theater Geeks, which is ProXPN. Now, ProXPN is a global virtual private network, or VPN, a little bit of alphabet soup here, that works with almost any internet connection, creates a secure, encrypted tunnel through which all of your online data passes back and forth. Any online application can work with ProXPN, including your web browser, email, file sharing, instant messaging programs, and so on. ProXPN keeps everything you do online hidden from prying eyes. Very important these days with all the news about government spying and so on. Disguises your physical location and gives you unfettered access to any website or online service, no matter where you live or travel to. You get complete online privacy through 512-bit encryption tunnel. Very difficult to crack that, I would say. And it works via OpenVPN or PPTP. You get to choose. Protect yourself against your ISP's 6 strikes rule even, and keep your personal internet usage private at work. Very important. You can bypass internet filtering and blocked websites, bypass geographical restrictions. It makes your internet connection region-free. ProXPN's software for Windows and Mac offers advanced controls, allowing you to select programs and ports you want to anonymously route through ProXPN's servers. ProXPN also works with your iOS or Android device, allowing you to use your data plan or public corporate Wi-Fi with complete and total privacy on the go. No app required. They also offer world-class customer support. Steve Gibson even gave it a great review on Security Now, and you know that means something here on the Twit Network. Go to proxpn.com/twit for more information and to sign up. ProXPN premium accounts are normally $9.95 a month or $74.95 for an entire year. But we've got a special offer. Use the promo code HTG to receive 20% off for the lifetime of your account. That's less than $5 a month on the yearly plan. If you're not satisfied, you can cancel within 7 days for a full refund. So go to proxpn.com/twit and sign up with the code HTG. And we thank ProXPN very much for their support of Home Theater Geeks. Okay, so we've talked about 3D. We've talked about color gamut. We talked about high frame rate. What about high dynamic range? Do you think that we're going to see greater dynamic range, especially with the laser projectors, in movies in the future? And are cameras now able to capture a greater dynamic range, that is the difference between the darkest and the brightest part of the picture, than projectors can now display?
Yeah, certainly I believe that cameras are more than capable of capturing a higher dynamic range and capturing higher contrast images. And I think that laser projection offers an opportunity to build projection equipment that's much higher contrast and that can cover a higher dynamic range. For instance, the projector we had in Burbank at the AMC location, that one was running about 3,000 to 1 contrast ratio, which is it's about 50% more than we run in a typical digital cinema environment. And that was really without even trying that hard. One of the nice things about projector design, to a certain extent, and to a limit, is that you can often throw away light for contrast. And in that case, we had more than enough light, and we were able to do that. So there's also some other things that various projector manufacturers are working on to increase the contrast capability of the projectors. I think at some point you'll reach diminishing returns in dynamic range and contrast because there's other sources of light in the cinemas. I mean, there's track lighting in the hallways, on the aisles. There's an exit sign in most cinemas that, you know, I think there's a lot of fire marshals that don't want you making that exit sign disappear during the show. So there's some challenges, and there's a point of diminishing returns certainly in commercial cinema.
What do you think the maximum contrast ratio is that is worth going after?
Worth going after? You know, I find it funny. I think to some extent the TV industry has made a bit of a mockery over contrast requirements, and mine is bigger than yours, and suddenly they're at millions and millions of contrast. And you know as well as I do, there's no way of perceiving those sorts of contrast differences in any real world environment. I mean, even in your specially darkened home theater room. I'm not ready to put a stake in the ground right now as to what the maximum contrast is going to be, because we simply haven't done those tests. We do know that there's room for improvement, and we know that audiences will notice and enjoy more contrast. We just haven't established that upper limit yet. But it's certainly not in the millions to one that the television manufacturers want you to believe it is.
Well, yeah, that certainly is something that I rail against often. Is you know, they take those measurements under absurd conditions that have no relation to real world conditions. And it's true, correct me if I'm wrong, that whereas the total dynamic range or contrast ratio of the human vision system is something like 10,000 or 100,000 or even 1,000,000 to 1, at any moment, at any given moment, it's only about 1,000 to 1. or maybe a few thousand to 1.
You know, I'm not an expert on that area, so I can't.
Okay.
Really, I mean, that sounds reasonable.
Yeah, because the dynamic range actually shifts up and down depending on the amount of ambient light, which is why when you go from a dark theater outdoors into the bright daylight, your eyes kind of hurt. It takes a moment for your visual system to recalibrate itself to a high ambient light environment as opposed to a low ambient light environment. So we don't really need any more than a few thousand to 1. Because if it's more than that, then the eye has to work hard to move up and down. I'm going to have a ophthalmologist on sometime to talk about this in more detail.
Yeah. Certainly, I think we can tell the difference between 2,000 to 1 and 10,000 to 1, though. And
yeah,
what the impact is on the viewer experience, we haven't done the research yet, but we're striving to design projectors that are much higher in contrast, and I think you'll see various announcements from us and even our competitors over the next few years, where we've been able to take laser projection systems and take some of the characteristics of a laser projector and turn that into contrast as well as brightness and color and dynamic range. So it's a lot of exciting things coming up in the pro cinema projection world.
Yeah, no kidding. Nerve in the chat room is asking, do lasers have higher gamut and dynamic range than most current film?
Yes, absolutely. The capability is there if you've got the content to take advantage of that capability.
Do you know, I guess this depends in part on film stock, but there are still quite a few movies being shot on film, even if they are then transferred to digital by means of scanning. But do you have any sense of what the native capabilities of film are? It depends on the stock, I'm sure, in part.
Yeah, and you know, I think various studies have been done, and this is another area of controversy where people have been fighting about it for years. Some people say, you know, film, one of the biggest, most hottest debated items is that of what's the effective resolution of film, and I've heard people say, oh, it's like 8K, oh, it's like 4K. Well, the DCI spec was really designed such that the average viewer wouldn't see a difference in quality, or certainly wouldn't see a reduction in quality going from the very first day, that very fresh copy of film, over to a digital version. And that's the sense I get now when I watch a digital movie is you know, to me it looks every bit as good as film does.
Mm-hmm. Weird Ami in the chat room is mentioning that many people think lasers are dangerous. And certainly I imagine if you were to, you know, look directly into the lens of a laser projector, it might not be a good idea. But certainly looking at a laser projection off of a screen is not dangerous.
It is absolutely not dangerous. I like to make the comparison. You wouldn't want to look down the barrel of a 30,000 lumen xenon projector,
no,
any more than you'd want to look directly into a laser projector. But we're not directly scanning lasers in our projectors. They're still going through a whack of optical elements. The image is still reflecting off of a DMD. There's by no means a direct emitted laser beam coming out of the front of the projector. And you know, a lot of the safety concerns out there are really there because of laws that were put in place in the 70s, whereby in the US especially, the Food and Drug Administration took over the regulation of laser light shows. And you know, because the technology didn't exist at the time, as laser projection has evolved, it's been lumped into the same category as laser light shows, which largely consist of direct emitted laser beams. And if you look into one of those, it can damage your eye in an instant. But laser projection, as far as we're concerned, and as far as the science and the research has told us, is perfectly safe, especially if you follow the right guidelines and make sure you keep the audience out of the line of sight as an extra precaution.
Right. You mentioned scanning lasers across the DMD, we should say right up front here that Christie projectors are based on DLP technology,
Absolutely.
which is a Texas Instrument technology with micro mirrors that jiggle back and forth, as opposed to the Sony projectors, which use LCOS, liquid crystal on silicon. But you mentioned scanning the lasers across the DMD, the digital micromirror device, which is the name of the actual chip.
We're not actually scanning the lasers across the DMD. It's more of a flooding the DMD might be a better.
That was my question. Are you taking a tiny little laser beam and scanning it quickly across the chip, or are you diffusing the red, green, and blue beams such that they bathe the chip all at the same time?
Absolutely, the latter.
Yeah, okay. And you're alternating, though, between red, green, and blue. Well, no, you got 3 chips probably.
There's 3 chips, and there's various ways to attack that one. You can bring all the RGB together into white light and break it up with a prism, which is one approach, and another approach is to actually...
That's the xenon approach, right? The xenon lamp produces white light, and then you take a prism and break that into red, green, and blue and direct that to each of the 3 chips.
So that's the most straightforward approach, and it's tried and proven, and it's probably what you're going to see in many of the early laser projection installations. But at some point, there's going to be designs available that where you can essentially shine the red, the green, and the blue light sources directly onto the 3 DMDs, each individually.
Are you saying that in the early laser projectors, you're taking the red, green, and blue laser light and combining it into white?
That's correct. And
then re-dividing it back into red, green, and blue?
That's correct.
Why?
It allows a certain... We're in a known space. I mean, we know how to build projectors with prisms. We know how they react. We know how the colors... The color science of a prism-based system is very well known and safe. Cinemas don't want surprises. They don't want technology that hasn't been proven for years. I mean, this is a business, and you've got a show to run. Certainly, I think you'll find in many of the labs of the top projector manufacturers that other methodologies are being explored. But the prism itself it's not a huge source of light loss. Combining RGB components into white light doesn't cost you any light. I mean, these are all negligible losses. Granted, it does add extra components into the projection system, but they're known components.
Interesting. Luis in the chat room is asking, can you please ask, what is the efficiency of laser projectors versus xenon, i.e. for each watt of consumed power, how much is lost?
How much is lost? I don't have those numbers handy. Like I said, in terms of converting electrical power to light, a laser projector is substantially more efficient than a xenon projector. But all of the efficiency you gain, you're throwing away to cool those lasers to the subambient place where they operate. Yes,
you did mention that earlier. Web7820 in the chat room is asking, when will there be a 4K 0.98-inch DMD chip available?
I think that person should ask Texas Instruments that question.
What is the size of the 4K chip you're using now?
Right now, it's a 1.38-inch chip.
Okay. And that's what Texas Instruments is making now, and what we would expect to see
for 4K. Yeah.
What for 4K? What difference does the size of the chip make?
For a xenon-based projector, it has a huge impact on the amount of light you can put on the chip. So it would be very difficult to build a really bright projector with a really small chip, because all the energy density on that small surface would burn up the chip. So the larger the chip, generally the more energy density you can put on that chip, and the less optical tricks you have to play to get that light focused on the chip. Now with lasers, it's a slightly different story, because with lasers, there's no ultraviolet, there's no infrared, which the ultraviolet especially is known to be damaging to optical and electronics components. So that element totally disappears with lasers. But also with lasers, it's also much easier to direct the light exactly where you want it without the complex optical elements.
Well, my last question then is, what's coming down the pike from Christie? Unfortunately, we're recording this on July 15th, and on the Christie website, there's a teaser about some big news coming in 2 days from now, which you probably can't talk about.
Wow, that's great. You've done your homework. I can tell you that that's not a projector innovation coming down the pipe. It's something specifically for exhibitors, and we're really excited about that product launch. So come on back and visit our website in a couple of days, and you can learn all about it.
Well, there's a tease for you. Okay, great. Thank you so much for being here. Don Shaw, Senior Director of Product Development at Christie, thanks so much for a great hour of very interesting geek talk about commercial digital cinema, laser projection, and stuff we might be seeing coming down the pike. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Scott. It's absolutely my pleasure.
Great. You can find Christie, of course, at Christie Digital. That's CHRISTIE digital.com. You can find me online, of course, at avsforum.com. And you can email me at scott@twit.tv. And you can follow me on Twitter at HTGeekScott. And you can find previous episodes of Home Theater Geeks right here on the twit.tv website at twit.tv/HTG, and also on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/twit Home Theater Geeks. Next week, my guest geek is scheduled to be Fred Kitson, the Chief Technical Officer of DTS, to talk about DTS Headphone X and other DTS news. So it's going to be an audio-filled hour that I do hope you will join me for. Until then, geek out.